time for change. Today is when we must reform the global architecture if we are going to be prepared for a future in which Africa is able to reclaim its place.
It is my dream and my wish that our Africanization agenda become quite important, because the world yearns for multiplicities, not just monolithic knowledge systems that make us all the same when we are different flowers, different trees, different rivers.
You overcome the old in order to create the new. If you perpetuate colonial mentalities, you are replicating the old. You are not creating the new. You are not contributing to a renaissance. Obviously, unitizers must say we are part of the African Renaissance, and therefore as part of the African Renaissance, it must be to kill even this slave mentality from colonialism and all of that. It has to do that. If it doesn't do that, then it's not part of the process of the Renaissance on our continent.
The 10 catalytic niche areas that were introduced by the Principal and Vice Chancellor when she joined the university in 2021, they provided her vision in addition to what we already had in the strategy. But they aligned so well because they are groundbreaking in nature in terms of a lot of issues that are relating to our developmental needs.
There's interconnectedness in the catalytic niche areas, but also in the economic opportunities that we could derive from optimizing their implementation. They are optimizing the assets that are already available in Africa.
The third flagship project by the College of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences is our experimental farm. One of the real reasons that I came to UNISA as a next generation academic is because UNISA involves you in their decision making. They don't just make the decisions and then tell you what you need to do. You are actively involved every step of the way.
And building the farm is one of the things that would help us to be able to train in food production and bring the technology that would allow you to actually produce faster, better, and good food. And we're not talking about the GMO food, we're talking about our original crops that we have, our original animals that we have, but we'll then have to select them proper for the proper production.
Academics all have their own areas of research, but with the distinguished professors and with the catalytic niche areas across the university, these are areas that we highlight for special consideration, and it's something I'm doing in my niche area as well, looking at tracer studies to see actually what does actually happen to students after they've graduated. So the tracer study would track the graduate into the world of work, or even into the world of unemployment or entrepreneurial, or these days the gig economy, to see what the impact of their qualification has on various aspects of their lives. And the feedback from those would help you to design or redesign your programs so that you can ensure a better fit between the qualification and the market need.
Even though we have the quest to be part of the global village, that should not happen at the expense of us knowing who we are, what are our values, what are our cultures, because if we step out into the global village without an identity, we will be lost as a people.
For us to progress, to become independent, to become prosperous, to become united, we're going to need a cadre of future leaders who are purpose-led, who believe in Africa, who believe in what Africans can do, and who contribute to what Africa can be.
UNISA is my past, my present, my future, and my sense of knowledge.
My hope for a better life. It's my pride.
UNISA is my second chance.
It's my technology stimulator.
It's a catalyst for my personal growth.
UNISA is my place of stability.
A source for me to gain more knowledge and wisdom.
And also for my community.
UNISA is my happy home.
My pathway to learn, lead, and leave a legacy.
Artificial intelligence is going to have such a big impact on society. How well prepared is the society to cope with that? It must not become a conservative university. We've always done this stuff, we'll call it do this. But to say that we must always be competent and make a contribution to a rapidly changing world.
So we have the responsibility to be at the center of solutions to underemployment and unemployment. And therefore, as a Vice Chancellor, I must think about not only the present, the vision with the management team and the collective leadership must be what are the solutions that we put for the future. The staff, academics, professionals, administrative staff, students, alumni are quite excited about this new vision and what they have to do to support it and to collectively implement and to be committed to building even more assets than what we have gained in the 151 or 2 years of UNISA's existence. That's the vision into the future.
I am an African. I owe my being to the hills and the valleys, the mountains and the glades, the rivers, the deserts, the trees, the flowers, the seas, and the ever-changing seasons that define the face of our native land.
What he wanted was to train a new generation of Renaissance leaders who are going to transform the continent.
The key focus of the foundation is to look at the Renaissance of Africa.
To really begin to rethink about the kind of continent they want.
So the importance of this foundation is about thinking and action that's rooted amongst people saying they want a developed continent, they want a renewed continent.
So from that point, even this foundation, the founding person in all respect is Mrs. Mbeki.
Everything was in her hands, and she was very much ahead of us. She was our dreamer.
It is very important for Africa to build capable young African leaders for the future, to take forward the African Renaissance, because the entire concept is around African Renaissance.
The Renaissance for women on the continent is what it should be for people on the continent.
Congratulations on the establishment of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. With the creation of the Movement for African Renaissance, you have, during and after your presidency, reminded us all how vital it is to develop the policies and the human capacity needed to enable the people of our continent to realize our full potential. Your foundation's intention to help Africa's youth acquire the skills and tools necessary to create and sustain new development opportunities is truly laudable. We wish this project every success, and we are confident that with your will and determination, your foundation will go from strength to strength. I thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's cold and gloomy in Cape Town. Don't give us a reason to take the lecture back to Johannesburg, please. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Now that's a lot better. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you here this afternoon. Just perhaps a few protocol matters. When our guests of honor arrive, which is the patron of the Mbeki Foundation and our keynote speaker for today, I'm going to ask that we all please stand on our feet just to receive them in the room. Our proceedings today are being broadcast live. They are being streamed. So I'm going to ask that if you haven't, please put your phones on silent. Please, let's be mindful of that. And even as the lecture is unfolding, if you don't want to be caught off guard, if you notice a camera, chances are it is being streamed somewhere. I will give us the note as soon as I get the signal that they're in the room. A little premature, but all welcome nonetheless. Getting us warmed up and off to a good start. All right, I'm going to ask that we all please stand on our feet and receive our guests of honor.
Ngosi
fight together for lasting peace and justice on earth. Our sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life. Oh, sons and daughters of Africa, flesh of the sun and flesh of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
You may be seated. And thank you, choir, for that excellent rendition of the South African anthem, followed by the anthem of the African Union. You may be seated. Please, a final round of applause, please. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, excellencies, members of the diplomatic corps, leaders of academia, civil society, business, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to acknowledge the patron of this foundation that is hosting us today, His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki, and our keynote speaker for this year's lecture, Dr. Kayode Fayemi. Welcome to the 16th Thabo Mbeki Foundation Africa Day lecture here at Century City Conference Center. This year we convene under the theme, Rebuilding African Unity in an Age of Fragmentation, Sovereignty, Solidarity, and the Renewal of Institutions. Gathering here at the southern tip of our continent, we're also mindful that this marks 30 years of South Africa's Constitution, a document that in many ways represents the collective triumph of African unity and humanity itself over apartheid and over colonialism. Few constitutions in the world embody so profoundly the victory of justice over institutionalized injustice. It is also significant that when this constitution was adopted here in the city of our first colonial encounter, a long chapter of African history was closed and a new era began. That era would bring with it and find expression in initiatives such as the New Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, which this year marks 25 years since its adoption by the African Union. And it was on that occasion of South Africa's constitution, President Mbeki, if you allow me to quote you, that I have seen what happens when one person has superiority of force over another, when the stronger appropriate to themselves the prerogative even to annul the injunction that God created all men and women in his image. And perhaps at no other time in recent history have these words felt more urgent than what they do now. We're marked by growing global uncertainty, conflict, fragmentation, and one of the questions that this gathering seeks to answer this afternoon: what does African unity require in this age? And what must we rebuild, renew, and reimagine to secure Africa's future? My name is Kathy Mutlatlana. It is a pleasure to be standing in front of you today. I have the honor of moderating and managing our program for this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, today is also a good day, and how you respond to my next statement will tell a lot about you. It's a good day because it has absolutely nothing to do with whether you support Orlando Pirates or whether you support Orbit College FC. We are all going to have a really fantastic day. On that note, please allow me to welcome on stage to give us the welcoming remarks for our program, the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Professor Puleng LenkaBula. Let's give her a warm round of applause as she comes to stage.
Program Director Kathy Mutlatlana, thank you very much for inviting me. His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki, the Chancellor of the University of South Africa and the Patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, who's a host for this important lecture. Let me also recognize Honorable Ms. Toko Didiza, the Speaker of the South African National Assembly, who gave us the opportunity as a university to joining the National Parliament in celebration and commemoration of the Constitution. Our eminent speaker, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, former Governor of Ekiti State, Nigeria, who is here to deliver his keynote and for us to learning and hearing your insights, learning from and with you. May you give him a round of applause. And I think I should hear a great South African welcome with Boqwana. Thank you very much. Let me also recognize His Excellency Malika Haddadi, Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, participating, the Chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, who was also the Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University. We are truly appreciative of you and the trustees of the foundation for the work that we do together. Let me recognize Professor Funmi Olonisakin, the Vice President of King's College in London and a friend of the University of South Africa, we are honored by your presence. Members of the Diplomatic Corps representing various countries in South Africa present, Honorable Ganef Hendricks, Deputy Minister of Social Development and MP, General Bantu Holomisa, who has also been with us, the Deputy Minister of Defense, members of the Parliament present here, members of the Council of the University of South Africa, represented by Mr. Mlaudzi and all council, members of the executive management of the University of South Africa, the key anchors and colleagues who have made it important that the partnership for our university and the foundation continues to strengthening as we journey in the same way that the song which was sang here was saying the car is moving on, I'll say the spaceship is moving even greater heights. The relationship is strengthening and it is yielding excellent results. Sister institutions of higher learning that are here, I recognize Walter Sisulu University, University of Stellenbosch, University of Limpopo, as well as University of the Free State, who have been participating with us in many events that the University of South Africa, in partnership with the foundation, have been hosting. Members of the legal fraternity present, Students' Representative Council of the University of South Africa, and especially from this region of Western Cape, can I request that the students, I hear from you that you're here to listen to the wisdom. Can I hear the round of applause from yourselves about the lecture? The students. And therefore, to really express my gratitude to the creatives, the entertainers, the people who do not use ideas only, but also music as an important idea that our heads and our hearts understand what it means to being African. ISIBANE Africa did that with eloquence and elegance. A round of applause for them. Thank you. Now that I've done the table of precedence as required, and understanding that our patron is a master diplomat, I would not have, if I've left you, I want to apologize, but I would like you to understand that I followed the diplomatic process as was requested. I want to start now by really extending our appreciation as the University of South Africa for this important lecture. 17 years ago, in the Senate Hall of the University of South Africa, President Mbeki, after leaving government, said, I want to learn with, teach, and share my experiences, my lessons in the journey that I've traversed as an anti-apartheid activist, as a leader, and as a leader of government. That was on the 2nd of August, 17 years ago. And on that, he asked, what is the investment that is being required to being made, not just in the ideation, not just intellectually, but how do we look at investment systems that will aid and enable the transformation of South Africa, the continent, and the global arena? I can say without any hesitation, because I was in that meeting in Senate Hall, we were only 29 in that meeting. Dr. Tong, who was hosting that first meeting, recalls poignantly that we had to wait an hour and a half before others could join us. And the students learned that President Mbeki was in the hall. And the students flooded and said, President, we love you. We would like to hear your inputs. That memory still lingers vividly in my head. And President Mbeki, we're very grateful that 17 or 18 years later, the journey still continues, and UNISA is appreciative. As it is, I'm honored, and it's a privilege that I stand today to welcome you to the 16th installation of the annual Thabo Mbeki Lecture. As usual, we are a delighted partner that works with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation to providing a global platform of engaged scholarship and activism for our society, for the continent, but also for those in solidarity with the continent, to engaging on critical issues of the day that are necessary for attending and contradicting death-dealing systems. Program Director, as the University of South Africa, we pride ourselves on the partnerships and initiatives. We know what it means to millions of Africans who look up to the Pan-African institutions to facilitating dialogues, engagements, critical discussions, to reimagining the future, but at the same time, to addressing the contradictions of our times, the questions that those on the underside of economic history, of political history, of participation, those who are the least amongst us, to understand and ask the questions with us, what must be done about the conditions of our country, of our continent, and the world? What must be done about the wars and the violence that derail and decimate humanity? What must be done by knowledge systems that are not enacted into practical solutions that advance society? And how do universities, such as the University of South Africa, become partners with society and not just become separate ivory towers that museumize the knowledge that must be shared with society? Our theme suggests that we live in a world that is changing, that is often creating multiple challenges, where tensions are heightened, but also where global powers work as hegemons instead of in partnership with others. Our institutional systems are decimated. Those that are meant to serve society are not as strong as when they are formed. Yesterday, President Mbeki asked us the question, what was the Nugent report talking about? Why are we quiet when institutions that must support democracy are hollowed and we keep quiet? What do we do as institutions of learning and those who are the professorate when such institutions are not allowed to thrive? And how do we ensure that we become the conscience of society in the same way as the many intellectuals such as Achima Feji, Samia Amin, Amina Mama, and others would remind us? In a recent article published by Project Syndicate, Xolisa Ngwadla and Paul Thompson have this to say about the current international situation and the implications it might have for us. Empires do not yield power gracefully. At the height of the Roman Empire, legionaries carried the gladius, a short, precise instrument of dominance. But as the empire declined, soldiers eventually switched to the longer spatha, a choice that implied a loss of confidence vis-à-vis rivals and new challengers. The analogy is instructive now that the American hegemony is giving way to a multipolar world, and the rules-based trading order will be turbulent. The weapons are already getting longer, and Africa must decide how it will respond. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm persuaded that, in part, this code describes the kind of moment that we find ourselves in globally and the implications that it may have for the rest of us, the continent, as well as the global South. However, there's a reason why we are here and why we must continue to hope and to pursue change as progressive peoples of the global South and the global North. Writing about the interconnectedness of the past, the present, and the future, in 1978, the historical injustice, President Mbeki reminded us of the following. Modern political science recognizes the fact that social systems are founded on definite historical origins. If the saying, out of nothing comes nothing, is true, then it must follow that the future is formed and derives its first impulse in the womb of the present. These are the words that he said to remind us of this interconnectedness. And in true to the same words or similar words, our own academic at UNISA, but also based now at the University of Calgary, Gacheni Ndlovu, takes this understanding that President Mbeki projected and requested to be attentive to another understanding of the development of history and history. He further says, how Africa was conceived as an idea and integrated into the evolving Euro-North America-centric modernity is a tale of genealogies, of colonialities, and African resistances. Let's not forget the resistance. The 8 epochs, running from the 15th century to the 18th century, dominated by the slave trade and mercantilism. The post-1648 Westphalian order that inaugurated the exclusion of Africa from sovereignty. The 1884-85 Berlin Consensus, the scramble for the conquest of Africa, which was concretized by the dismemberment and fragmentation of Africa. The colonial governmentality that was characterized by production of African colonial subjectivity, and the post-1945 United Nations decolonization normative order that amounted to accommodation of Africa to the lowest echelons of modern world system. The Cold War coloniality that polarized Africa ideologically and reduced it to a theater of proxy hot wars. The post-Cold War triumphalism of the neoliberal order that Francis Fukuyama articulated as the end of history and the last man, and the post-9/11 or 9/11 anti-terrorist order that produced a new securitization order and the current coloniality of markets and the new scramble of Africa. This is the context that we should understand as an important arena for us when we reflect today about Africa, and Africa Day must be beckoning on us as citizens of this country and the continent. Program Director, I, however, have all the belief and hope that we as Africans know what is to be done as the geopolitical contestation heightens further. We know what to do to engage with rapidly changing world order. We know how to reform multilateralism, how to advance sovereignty, humanity, and how to reposition Africa as a serious player and a voice in a multipolar world that is coming. And in this regard, I wonder if it is a world fragmenting or resetting. And I prefer to see this in the eyes of my mentor, a professor that I greatly respect, Professor Adebayo Olokoshi, who reminds us that African countries have long been discontented with the existing multilateral systems. And of course, given her natural endowment, it is well placed to be a joint rule maker and should aim to help shape the rules of the future world order. But he says we will do this if the elites are not complicit with the dominating and the eruptions of domination that the hegemons would like to continue. On behalf of the University of South Africa, the University of the Land, the university committed to shaping futures, we welcome you to this 16th iteration of the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day Lecture. We hope the deliberation will enthuse you as an individual to activating your agency, to being a partner to a university and a foundation that are committed to working together for the betterment of our society. And we call on you in June. Registration will be open. UNISA has been an improving university, and we can say without hesitation, as the President encourages us that education is a resource that changes the plight of society, that you take advantage of one of the improving universities in our country, top 5 university, register or you lose being a president. President Mandela, Mbeki, and many others are alumnus of the University of South Africa. Welcome.
As you can tell, Professor LenkaBula is a true academic. All she was missing is for her to start saying class is in session. Thank you, Professor LenkaBula. I'm going to invite the team to please give us the message from Malika Haddadi, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission.
Your Excellency, former President Thabo Mbeki, distinguished representatives of the Foundation, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is both an honor and a pleasure to join you today within the wider context of Pan-Africanism, and particularly to deliver this lecture as part of the 16th Thabo Mbeki Foundation's Africa Day program of activities. I would have wished to participate in person, but due to a competing assignment by His Excellency the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, I am unable to be physically amongst you. Please rest assured that my spirit and commitment remain fully with you on this important occasion. Excellencies, permit me to begin by recognizing a leader whose life has been closely tied to the struggle for African dignity, self-determination, and unity. President Mbeki belongs to a generation that did not simply speak about African unity, but worked often at great personal and political cost to give it meaning. From the years of struggle against apartheid, to his role in shaping South Africa's democratic transition, and later his leadership in advancing the transformation of the Organization of African Unity into the African Union, he has remained consistent in his belief that Africa must define its own path. His articulation of the African Renaissance was not a slogan. It was a practical call for Africa to build capable institutions, invest in its people, and engage the world with confidence and coherence. That vision remains relevant, perhaps even more so today. The theme for this occasion, rebuilding African unity in an age of fragmentation, sovereignty, solidarity, and the renewal of institutions, aptly encapsulates this vision. I would like to pause here as a daughter of Africa, as a Pan-Africanist, as a deputy chairperson of an institution he contributed in transforming, to appreciate and thank President Mbeki for his commitment to our mother continent. Excellencies, Africa today is home to over 1.5 billion people, and by 2050, 1 in every 4 people in the world will be African. This is not simply a demographic projection. It is a governance challenge. African unity has been touted since the early days of our independence, but remains largely unrealized in many ways. That is why it must be understood not in abstract terms, but as a working system based on collective action. For instance, in the Sahel, insecurity has disrupted key trade corridors and affected agricultural production. Across the continent, these pressures affect how goods move, how markets function, and how states respond. We must unite in delivering common responses to these and other challenges confronting our continental organization and our continent. Especially so in the current geopolitical situation, which increasingly demands self-reliance on our part if we are to remain relevant and thrive. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me touch on sovereignty. While at its core, this deals with sovereign equality of states and associated concepts of non-interference, etc., in today's context, sovereignty must be judged by effectiveness in several ways. Let me start by our continental institution, the African Union, that seeks to address sovereignty as a central dimension of its ongoing institutional reform. It borders on our ability to strategically voice and be united as a global partner in multilateral fora, as well as on our ability to guide the Union to financial autonomy, sovereignty, and institutional effectiveness in compliance with decisions made by the African heads of states and governments in Johannesburg and Kigali in 2015 and 2017, respectively. Allow me to refer to our intra-African trade, for instance, that still accounts for only about 15% of Africa's total trade, compared to nearly 60% intra-European trade. This is not due to lack of demand, but rather because barriers we can address. Delays at borders, inconsistent standards, and weak infrastructure continue to limit movement. The African Continental Free Trade Area was designed to change this situation. Sovereignty, in this sense, is not weakened by cooperation. It is strengthened when systems work across borders. Excellencies, solidarity must also be practical. During the COVID-19 pandemic, African countries demonstrated solidarity through the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust and secured over 400 million doses of vaccines at a time when global supply was uncertain. That was solidarity in action. In peace and security, African-led operations in Somalia under successive AU missions, and despite challenges, have helped maintain pressure on insurgent groups and supported state institutions over many years. But we must acknowledge the gaps. In some crises, responses have been delayed. Solidarity must therefore be consistent and predictable. Ladies and gentlemen, our institutions remain central to this effort. The African Development Bank estimates that Africa faces an infrastructure financing gap of between 68 billion and 108 billion US dollars annually. High transport costs remain one of the biggest constraints on trade. In some cases, it costs more to move goods within Africa than to ship them outside the continent. This is where institutions must deliver. In the digital space, we see what is possible when systems work. Mobile money platforms, first developed at scale in Kenya, now process transactions equivalent to a significant share of GDP in some countries. These are practical examples of institutional effectiveness. Excellencies, Africa's youth will determine whether progress is sustained. Over 60% of Africans are under the age of 25 years. This is a major advantage, but only if it is matched with opportunity. Across cities such as Lagos, Nairobi, Algiers, Johannesburg, or Kigali, young people are building businesses in technology, logistics, and services. Yet, many still face barriers to employment and access to capital. This gap must be addressed directly. It requires investment in skills, support for entrepreneurship, and policies that create clear pathways into the labor market. Rebuilding unity in an age of fragmentation is not about broad declarations. It is about practical steps, reducing delays at borders, coordinating responses to insecurity, ensuring that infrastructure projects are completed, making institutions responsive and accountable, speaking with one voice in multilateral fora, and continue to strengthen our integration and the bonds between our people. These are not theoretical goals, they are measurable actions. Ladies and gentlemen, President Thabo Mbeki and other African leaders have, over the years, reminded us that Africa's progress depends not only on vision, but on the discipline to act with purpose and consistency. His legacy challenges us to move beyond reflection and to embrace responsibility. At this moment, that responsibility rests squarely with us. The conditions we face today require more than reaffirmation of ideals. They demand practical action, as I said. Above all, we must restore confidence and trust. This is how unity is rebuilt, not through declarations, but through outcomes that people can see and experience in their daily lives. Africa's future will not be defined by circumstances, but by choice. The choices we make to work together, to act together, and to build together. And if we remain guided by that conviction, then we can be confident that the vision of an integrated, resilient, and self-assured Africa will not only endure, but will also be realized within our time. Let us keep high the banner of African unity, Pan-Africanism, solidarity, renewal, and prosperity for the ultimate benefit of our people. I thank you for your kind attention.
That message of support there from the African Union Commission. Well, we're getting into the heart of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, and allow me then to welcome our next speaker, who is the chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. She's going to do an introduction of the topic and also introduce our guest lecturer. Please, let's give a round of applause for Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi.
Program Director, Ms. Kathy Motlatlana, His Excellency President Thabo Mbeki, Professor Puleng LenkaBula, Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Excellencies, members of the executive, parliamentarians, members of the diplomatic corps, leaders of business, colleagues from government, the academy, and civil society, sisters, brothers, and friends. We do not gather this evening merely to observe a date on the calendar, but to engage in a profound act of continental reflection and foresight. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, it is a distinct honor to welcome you to the 16th Thabo Mbeki Africa Day Lecture. That we convene here in Cape Town for the very first time in the history of this platform is no mere accident of geography. It is a deliberate anchoring of our shared African destiny at the southernmost tip of our continent, the place where the two oceans meet, the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean. And we are here today. Since 2023, the Foundation has rotated this lecture across the continent as a living, practical expression of Pan-Africanism. Bringing the dialogue to Cape Town this year represents that same instinct turned inwards, and as you were reminded earlier, it also coincides with the 30th year of our Constitution. It stands as a definitive statement that Africa Day belongs to the entirety of our nation, and that the rigorous work of continental introspection must permeate every civic and intellectual center of South Africa, rather than being sequestrated in just one. This evening sits at the apex of a deliberately constructed week of inquiry. On Thursday, the Foundation, alongside Auda Nepad and UNISA, convened a high-level business breakfast reflecting on 25 years of NEPAD. We asked what regional integration, African ownership, and continental delivery truly demand in practical terms today. On Friday, UNISA and the National Parliament hosted an academic colloquium in the National Assembly, exploring 30 years of our Constitution and South Africa's evolving role in a rapidly shifting global order. On Monday, the week will conclude with our youth. President Mbeki will engage with learners at Milnerton High School, followed by a student town hall at UNISA Parow, featuring both Prof. Fayemi and President Mbeki. Taken together, these engagements trace the imperative of unity across our economy, our constitution, our lecture halls, our schools, and the imagination of the next generation. This evening's lecture is the crucible where these vital threads are drawn into a single, cohesive argument. The theme we have set ourselves is deliberately demanding rebuilding African unity in an age of fragmentation, sovereignty, solidarity, and the renewal of institutions. Constitutional democracy remains the paramount instrument for directing the life of a nation. It is the vessel of our most cherished values and the reflection of our national interest. Yet constitutions must speak directly to the lived realities of our people. Failing this, they lose legitimacy and are inevitably ignored. This truth applies across our continent. Wielded wisely, democratic frameworks maintain our moral compass amidst the dangerous currents of global politics. But when ignored or cynically abused, democracy transmogrify into very authoritarian, oppressive systems that exploiters of Africa favor. Weak states, led by rudderless leaders, ripe for deep penetration and extraction. This theme is difficult because it forces us to confront a hard truth. The deepest fragmentation crisis on our continent is not born of our borders, languages, religions, or political traditions. Africa has always contained multiplicity. Our unity has never demanded sameness. The structural crisis we face today is the collapse of institutional legitimacy. It's the slow, corrosive erosion of our citizens' belief that public power is lawful, fair, competent, and accountable. Recent Afrobarometer findings paint a stark picture across much of the continent. Citizens trust their presidents, parliaments, courts, and police forces for less than they did a decade ago. In too many nations, only the military, religious leaders, and traditional authorities still command majority public trust. This is the quantifiable data of a democratic order under severe strain. A coup does not truly begin when soldiers take over national television. It begins years earlier, in the quiet moments when citizens conclude that civilian institutions have become too remote, too corrupt, or too self-serving to warrant their defense. Professor Siba Grovagia, a Guinean scholar and former deliverer of this very lecture, framed it bluntly. The horrible mistake of independence, he argued, was the assumption that the colonial state was an adequate instrument of governance, that we merely needed to replace white office holders with black ones while leaving the architecture intact. The form of the state survived, but the countervailing powers did not. We have lived ever since with what Makerere University's Sylvia Tamale calls the institutional coloniality of state politics. We inherited an architecture of public power designed to extract and to command, not to listen, account, or repair. This condition compels the foundation to ask, what sovereignty, solidarity, and constitutional renewal mean in practice today? Sovereignty cannot be a shield behind which elites evade scrutiny. Solidarity cannot be the silence of African leaders when constitutions are manipulated, elections are degraded, or citizens are brutalized. Renewal cannot mean recycling declarations, while the very institutions meant to serve the public, courts, parliaments, electoral commissions, steadily bleed public confidence. The African Renaissance must be rescued from the safety of ceremony. It must translate into hard work of rebuilding institutions worthy of public belief. It is precisely for these reasons that we've invited tonight's guest lecturer. Professor John Kayode Fayemi is a scholar, a public intellectual, and a former two-term governor of Ekiti State in Nigeria. Long before holding elective office, he was a leading thinker on democratic governance, public sector reform, and post-conflict reconstruction. His work has taken him from the academy to the African Union, the Commonwealth, ECOWAS, and the front lines of Nigeria's own democratic struggle. As a governor, he subjected his ideas to the rigorous discipline of delivery. As chairperson of the Nigeria Governors Forum and a minister of solid minerals development in the federal cabinet, he tested them at scale. He is a leader who has thought deeply about institutions and has done the grueling work of building them. And this is a rare combination. And it is the exact perspective our theme demands. Professor Fayemi, we're deeply honored that you've accepted our invitation and traveled to be with us. The Foundation thanks you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the podium to deliver the scene-setting address of the 16th Thabo Mbeki Day Lecture, Professor Kayode Fayemi.
Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, for your very generous remarks. Your Excellency, our leader, President Thabo Mbeki, Madam Vice Chancellor, who has already beautifully established the order of precedence, and I wouldn't like to bore you by repeating what she's done so well, but just to concur and agree with our protocol list. It is both a profound honor and a personal privilege and pleasure to join you today at the invitation of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and the University of South Africa to deliver the 16th Africa Day Lecture, holding in Cape Town, South Africa. Permit me first to express immense gratitude to President Thabo Mbeki, one of Africa's most inspirational statesmen and leaders, whose lifelong commitment to the African cause continues to shape our continental imagination. President Mbeki belongs to that generation of African leaders who understand that the liberation of Africa was never simply about the transfer of political power from colonial administrators to African elites, but about restoring the dignity of African peoples, reclaiming Africa's voice in the world, and building institutions capable of transforming independence into genuine freedom and structural transformation. For many of us across the continent, President Mbeki's articulation of the imperative of the African Renaissance is not merely an empty political slogan. It is a call for concerted efforts to be made to achieve a long overdue continental rebirth. The call has challenged Africans to think historically, act collectively, and build with confidence. Like many, I had the call, and therefore stand before you As a partisan of a generation shaped by the ideals of Pan-African solidarity, democratic struggle, and institutional renewal about which the President has consistently spoken. And perhaps there could be no better place to have this conversation today than here in South Africa, a nation whose long and determined journey of liberation inspired millions across the continent and the world, and whose democratic trajectory are deeply intertwined with Africa's broader search for a stable democratic development. And that Africa is now at a historical crossroads. Excellencies, across our continent, one senses simultaneously the weight of history and the urgency of the future. We're living through a moment of profound transition in the world and within Africa itself, a moment in which the assumptions that shaped the post-colonial African state, internally and externally, are being challenged by new political, economic, and social realities as the post-1945 global order, built under the banner of Pax Americana, wanes and a new world order is rearing its head. Our continent today embodies extraordinary paradoxes. Never at any point in time has Africa possessed such immense demographic strength, and all our previous speakers referred to this, entrepreneurial energy, cultural influence, and strategic global relevance. African music and movies shape global culture. African technology entrepreneurs are redefining innovation. African youth are among the most politically conscious generations in our history. The world is increasingly recognizing that the future of labor, energy transition, strategic minerals, and even global markets will be deeply connected to Africa. In short, in many of these areas, if you don't go Africa, you cannot go green. Yet at the same time, many African societies are grappling with profound uncertainty, massive, unprecedented insecurity and criminality at different levels, persistent and even growing poverty and socioeconomic inequality, collapsing public trust in institutions, weakening democratic governance, and growing authoritarianism, evidenced by military interventions, insecurity, and instability in different forms threaten social cohesion. While across many of our societies, citizens increasingly question whether independence has translated into dignity, opportunity, and justice. This is the paradox of contemporary Africa. Allegedly politically independent, yet often economically constrained. Globally relevant, yet internally fragmented. Resource-rich, yet bedeviled with poor leadership and institutionally vulnerable. It is therefore no coincidence that the theme of this lecture, advancing African unity, sovereignty, solidarity, and the renewal of institutions, speaks directly to the defining questions of our time. Without sovereignty, African countries remain vulnerable to external manipulation and dependency. Without solidarity, African societies become fragmented and susceptible to fear, mistrust, and division. Without strong institutions and underlying visionary leadership, neither sovereignty nor solidarity can be sustained over time. The central challenge, therefore, before Africa is not simply how to survive ongoing global geopolitical shifts, but how to organize with confidence, a collective spirit, courage, and dignity in order to help shape the new global order that is emerging as a co-rule maker and not a hapless rule taker. But what does sovereignty mean in the 21st century? For much of the 20th century, African sovereignty was understood primarily in political and territorial terms. Sovereignty meant the end of colonial rule. It meant the lowering of foreign flags and the emergence of independent African governments. That struggle was historic and necessary. Men and women across this continent sacrificed enormously to secure the rights of Africans to govern themselves. But the world has changed profoundly since the era of political independence. Today, sovereignty can no longer be understood narrowly. In the 21st century, sovereignty is measured not merely by political symbols, but by state capacity. True sovereignty is the ability of nations to make independent developmental and governance choices. It is the ability to determine economic and political priorities without external coercion. It is the capacity to feed one's population, secure one's borders, manage one's natural resources responsibly, educate one's citizens, industrialize strategically, and negotiate internationally from a position of confidence. In many respects, the global economy has entered a new age of strategic competition. The world is increasingly shaped by struggles over technology, artificial intelligence, energy transition, supply chains, and critical minerals. In this emerging global order, Africa occupies a central position. Our continent possesses vast reserves of the mineral essential for the global green transition, from cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo to lithium in Zimbabwe, from platinum in South Africa to rare earth minerals across various parts of our continent. Africa is indispensable to the sustenance and future of the global economy. In short, the world cannot go green without first going Africa. Yet, history compels us to ask difficult questions. Will Africa once again remain merely a source of raw materials for external industrial powers? Will we continue to export wealth while importing poverty and dependency? Or can this historical moment become the turning point through which Africa finally moves from extraction to structural transformation? This question is deeply personal to me. During my service as Nigeria's Minister of Mines and Mineral Resources Development, I saw both the enormous promise and the painful contradictions of Africa's mineral economy. I saw how weak governance structures often permit illicit extraction, environmental degradation, corruption, and capital flight. But I also saw the transformative potential that emerges when policy reforms, transparency, and long-term industrial planning are taken seriously. Africa cannot achieve meaningful sovereignty whilst remaining dependent on external actors for technology, manufacturing, financing, and value addition. Sovereignty requires productive capacity. This is why the African Continental Free Trade Area must be understood not simply as a trade arrangement, but as a strategic instrument for continental transformation. AfCFTA provides Africa with an unprecedented opportunity to create integrated regional value chains, strengthen inter-African trade, and reduce structural dependency. The future of Africa's sovereignty lies not in isolation, but in deliberate integration. A prosperous and sovereign Africa will be built through interconnected economies, shared infrastructure, coordinated industrial policy, and strategic regional cooperation. But we have to deal with the crisis of the global order. And what's Africa's position going to be in that? Clearly, it's been said, and I agree, the international system is passing through a period of profound uncertainty and restructuring. The assumptions that shape the post-Cold War global order are increasingly breaking down before our own eyes. Across the world, multilateral institutions are under strain. Geopolitical rivalries are intensifying. Economic nationalism is resurgent, and global cooperation is becoming more fragmented. The liberal rules-based in multilateral order is fraying. Ironically, the chief violators of the rules underpinning the post-1945 multilateral order are some of its architects. And we're witnessing a world in which powerful nations increasingly prioritize narrow national interests and strategic competition over collective responsibility. Global institutions that were originally established to promote coordination, coherence, and stability now often reflect deep asymmetries of power. In many respects, the voices and priorities of the Global South remain marginal within the architecture of international governance and development. Africa must therefore approach this changing world with both realism and strategic clarity. Our continent cannot afford to become merely a theater for external competition among global powers. Whether the contest comes from East or West, from old powers or emerging middle powers, Africa's responsibility remains fundamentally the same: to develop the internal capacity of governments, businesses, and citizens to engage the rest of the world from a position of self-assurance, long-term vision, and clarity. Because for too long, we have approached international engagement from a posture of dependency rather than strategic partnership. Too often, external relationships have been defined by aid, extraction, and security dependence rather than by long-term developmental interest. Our future demands something different, and that was what President Mbeki and his colleagues articulated clearly in the new Partnership for Africa's Development. Africa must increasingly move from aid diplomacy to interest-based diplomacy. We must engage globally, not merely as recipients of external assistance, but as strategic actors of shaping outcomes. And that ultimately requires institutional competence. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, no country can negotiate effectively in the global arena without capable public institutions and leaders with foresight. No society can protect its sovereignty if critical sectors of governance and development are permanently outsourced. Across the continent, we have witnessed situations in which our states depend excessively on external actors for security arrangements, technological infrastructure, energy systems, and even aspects of day-to-day governance. We must take note that sovereignty outsourced is sovereignty diminished. This challenge is especially evident in parts of the Sahel region of West Africa, where I come from, where the resurgence of military coups has raised difficult questions about the state of democracy and governance across the region. But let me state clearly, constitutional order must always remain the foundation of legitimate governance. Military intervention cannot become a durable and legitimate substitute for democratic accountability. However, if democracy is to endure in Africa, we must honestly confront the governance and institutional failures that often create fertile conditions for democratic breakdown. In many societies, citizens increasingly feel disconnected from our political institutions. Elections alone, even when free and fair, do not sustain democratic legitimacy if governance fails to produce inclusion, justice, and opportunity. Too often, Democracy has been associated in the minds of ordinary citizens with elite circulation rather than social transformation. When people experience persistent poverty, insecurity, corruption, and exclusion, despite formal democratic processes, frustration accumulates. In this sense, military intervention is often not the disease itself, but a symptom of a deeper institutional crisis. The real danger confronting many African democracies today is the erosion of public trust. And once trust in institutions and leaders begins to collapse, political instability becomes increasingly difficult to contain. That is why the renewal of African institutions and leadership is not an abstract intellectual exercise. It is an urgent political necessity tied directly to the survival of democratic governance itself across the entire continent. But how do we renew African institutions? Where is this visionary leadership going to come from? Strong institutions and visionary leadership cleverly combined are ultimately the invisible architecture. But history repeatedly demonstrates that societies do not simply collapse because they lack natural resources or talented citizens. Nations fail when institutions become weak, hijacked, personalized, corrupted, and incapable of commanding trust. Our continent is not lacking in intelligence, creativity, or human potential. Africa is overflowing with an abundance of talented young people, innovative entrepreneurs, accomplished professionals, technocrats, and resilient communities. But no nation can build prosperity on improvisation, no matter how talented the population is. Development requires leadership vision and institutional continuity. It requires systems that function predictably, regardless of who occupies political office. This is one of the most important lessons of history, which Africa must now embrace with greater seriousness. The future of the continent will not be secured merely through speeches or charismatic personalities. It will be secured through the patient and disciplined construction by visionaries of capable institutions that are able to stand the test of time. But we also require strong universities, research institutions, policy centers, capable of generating African solutions to African challenges. We require transparent public finance systems that reduce corruption and improve service delivery. We require effective local governance structures that bring democratic accountability closer to the ordinary citizens. Above all, we require institutions capable of earning and sustaining public trust. Trust is the currency of legitimacy. This is why visionary leadership matters profoundly. And by this type of leadership, I do not refer merely to political office holders. I refer to leadership understood as ethical stewardship, leadership grounded in restraint, responsibility, and institutional vision. It is leadership that is savvy and forward-looking. Africa needs leaders who understand that power is temporary, but institutions are enduring. We need leaders prepared to build systems that outlive their own tenure in office. We need leaders capable of resisting the temptation to personalize the state or weaken institutions for short-term political gain and personal gratification. Africa needs leaders who place the national interest above personal interest. But no conversation about African unity can avoid the question of solidarity, because solidarity is ultimately the moral foundation upon which Pan-Africanism rests. African unity cannot be sustained merely through treaties, summits, or diplomatic declarations. It must be rooted in a shared emotional and historical consciousness, a recognition that the destiny of African peoples remains interconnected. the great contemporary architects of Pan-Africanism understood this very clearly. Great leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Patrice Lumumba, Nelson Mandela, and if I dare say so, Thabo Mbeki, to cite a few of them, understood it, and their legacy has consistently reminded us that Africa's future depends not only on economic cooperation, but also, quite importantly, on the cultivation of a deeper continental consciousness. Pan-Africanism was never simply about political coordination among states. It was fundamentally a moral project. A project grounded in the belief that the dignity of one African is tied to the dignity of all Africans. And that is why we must confront honestly and courageously the troubling rise of Afrophobia and xenophobia. Within parts of our continent, including here in South Africa. Let me speak carefully, but candidly, because I'm a Nigerian. Let me speak carefully, but candidly. South Africa's liberation was not won by South Africans alone. Thankfully, President Mbeki recently reminded us of that solemn truth. The anti-apartheid struggle became a continental responsibility. Across Africa, nations and citizens made sacrifices in support of South Africa's freedom. African countries offered sanctuary to exiles and liberation movements. As a young university student in Nigeria in the early 1980s, I and several of my colleagues gained our Pan-African consciousness working at the ANC and SWAPO offices in Kefi, Lagos. Under the tutelage of President Mbeki, then our chief representative of ANC, and later Comrades Mark Shope and Comrade Victor Matlow, successive chief representatives, and also Comrade Kampala and Hamani Chete, chief representatives of SWAPO in Nigeria at the time. African workers and taxpayers contributed resources to support the liberation effort. African intellectuals mobilized international solidarity. African leaders paid diplomatic and economic cost in confronting apartheid. Nigeria, among many others, stood firmly in support of South Africa's liberation. But this was not charity. It was solidarity. It was an understanding that oppression anywhere in Africa threatened dignity everywhere in Africa. This shared history matters profoundly. And that is why violence or hostility directed at fellow Africans anywhere on the continent must concern us deeply. Afrophobia is not merely a law enforcement issue or a question of migration policy. It represents a crisis of continental consciousness that negates the continental renaissance that we all seek. But at the same time, we must approach this issue with maturity and honesty. Xenophobia does not emerge in a social vacuum. It is often fueled by economic inequality, unemployment, weak governance, poor service delivery, political manipulation, and institutional distrust. I do not minimize the genuine hardship that produce such desperate reasonings. Youth unemployment is not a statistic. It is a daily humiliation. And when institutions fail to provide relief, communities will sometimes violently seek to define the boundary of who belongs to where. Ghanaians did it in 1969 when the Busia government sent Nigerians packing. Nigeria retaliated in 1979 and 1981 when the Shagari government sent Ghanaians back home in the Ghana Must Go episode. In societies where citizens feel economically insecure, frustration can easily be redirected towards the most vulnerable groups. But that understanding is not exoneration. Whilst we must acknowledge these pressures, which are largely the inheritance of apartheid structural deformations, we must never legitimize violence or exclusion against fellow Africans. If Africans cannot coexist peacefully with one another, then the dream of continental integration will remain fundamentally weakened. The African Continental Free Trade Area cannot flourish in an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Regional integration cannot deepen where fear and hostility dominate public life. Africa, therefore, requires a renewed ethos of continental citizenship that emphasizes that sovereignty is not in conflict with solidarity. We must teach younger generations that being proudly Nigerian, South African, Kenyan, Ghanaian, or Senegalese is entirely compatible with being proudly African. Identity must not become exclusion. Indeed, Africa's strength has always resided in its diversity: linguistic, cultural, religious, geographic, and historical. Our challenge is not to erase these differences, but to build solidarity across them. And perhaps that is the meaning of African unity in our time. Unity, not uniformity, but shared purpose. The future of Africa will be shaped more by the aspirations, energies, and opportunities available to the younger generation. And that is why I'm glad that this year's series of events places a lot of premium on engagement with younger people. By the middle of this century, Africa will possess the youngest population in the world. By 2050, 1 in every 4 human beings on Earth will be African. This demographic transformation represents one of the most consequential developments in global history. If properly educated, empowered, and productively engaged, African youth could become the engine of an unprecedented continental transformation. Our young people possess immense creativity, technological adaptability, and entrepreneurial dynamism. And across the continent, we already see African youth driving innovation in finance, in technology, in entertainment, in civic activism, and in business. But demographic potential alone does not automatically produce prosperity. If young populations remain excluded, unemployed, and alienated, demographic advantage can quickly become demographic instability. This is why governance reform and youth inclusion are inseparable. Young Africans today are demanding far more than ritualistic democracy or ceremonial politics. They're demanding accountable governance, economic opportunity, dignity, transparency, and institutions that function fairly. Across the continent, we're witnessing the emergence of a new African civic consciousness shaped by digital technology, social media, and growing political awareness. From the NSAS movement in Nigeria to youth mobilizations in Kenya and here in South Africa and other countries, young Africans are increasingly asserting themselves as political actors rather than passive observers. This development should not be feared. Rather, it should be welcomed and understood as evidence of democratic maturation. Governments that respond to legitimate civic demands with repression rather than reform risk deepening distrust between states and citizens. The future of African democracy will depend significantly on whether our institutions can adapt to the aspirations of this new generation. Young people must feel that democracy works for them, that it can improve their lives, materially and socially. If democratic systems fail repeatedly to produce opportunity and inclusion, political frustration will continue to grow. African universities must once again become centers of intellectual courage, policy innovation, and democratic engagement. Our institutions of higher learning cannot merely reproduce imported ideas uncritically. They must contribute actively to solving African problems. And no serious discussion about Africa's future can ignore the climate crisis. Africa contributes the least to global carbon emissions, yet suffers disproportionately from climate vulnerability. From drought in the Horn of Africa to flooding in West and Southern Africa, climate change is already reshaping livelihoods, migration patterns, food security, and political stability. Africa must resist false choices. We cannot accept a global order in which Africa is told to remain underdeveloped in the name of climate responsibility. Climate justice requires fairness. Africa must industrialize, expand energy access, and modernize infrastructure. But Africa must also pursue a development pathway that is sustainable, innovative, and equitable. The green transition presents us with an opportunity if strategically managed. Africa can become not merely a supplier of raw materials for global green industries, but a producer of green technologies. But again, this will depend on governance and visionary leadership. And without strong institutions and visionary leaders, the green economy may simply reproduce old patterns of extraction and dependency. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this lecture is advancing African unity, sovereignty, solidarity, and renewal institution. It's at its core a declaration that the building is not complete, that we're not yet what we can be, and that the gap between what we are and what we can be is not destiny. It is a challenge, and challenges are for the living. This challenge requires honesty, the willingness to name our failures, xenophobia, governance deficits, socioeconomic debilities, institutional failures. Honesty is a prerequisite of credible aspiration. It requires memory with wisdom. We must remember the Ghana must go expulsion that I referred to, not to shame Nigeria, but to inoculate us against repetition. It requires solidarity that is structural, not sentimental. Free movement of persons and goods across African borders, investment in regional infrastructure that creates interdependence, because interdependence is the practical engine of solidarity. Finally, it's a challenge that requires a new political imagination and a renewal of hope. But this renewal of hope is itself a political task, and it's not hope that is sustained by speeches, but by visible institutional progress and leadership selflessness. And as I conclude, let me say with conviction that Africa's future will not be determined by the limitations of our past, but by the quality of the choices we make in this moment. The central lesson of our time is clear. Sovereignty without visionary leadership and institutional capacity is fragile. Unity without solidarity is hollow. And development without accountable governance is unsustainable. Africa, therefore, stands at a historic juncture. We must move beyond symbolic independence towards collective strategic autonomy. We must strengthen institutions that command public trust rather than personalize power. We must cultivate a continental ethic rooted not in exclusion or suspicion, but in solidarity, shared responsibility, and common destiny. Pan-Africanism must live not only in declarations, lecture rooms, and conferences, but in everyday political and moral conduct of African societies. A continent divided against itself cannot lead globally. At the same time, Africa's greatest strategic asset remains its people, particularly its youth and women. Empowering the African woman has to be one of the cardinal goals of our time. Their energy, creativity, and democratic aspirations represent the foundation upon which the next phase of Africa's transformation must be built. Our task is to ensure that institutions are capable of converting that potential into reality, innovation, and shared prosperity. The future of Africa will, therefore, depend on whether we can align 4 critical imperatives: capable institutions, visionary leadership, democratic legitimacy, and continental solidarity. If we succeed, Africa will not merely adapt to the changing global order. Africa will help shape it. And future generations may then say of us that this era in which Africans chose renewal over decline, unity over fragmentation, institutions over impunity, and shared progress over narrow self-interest. The choice is ours to make. So let us be the catalyst for the achievement of that African Renaissance President Thabo Mbeki has always spoken to us about. Happy Africa Day 2026. I thank you.
Your Excellency, former President Thabo Mbeki, distinguished representatives of the
Ladies and gentlemen, you may be seated. Dr. Fayemi, thank you for that very clear language that you have given us to characterize the state of the continent, but also the challenges that we face. Thank you also for getting on a plane to come to Cape Town and touch us on our studios, as we say in South Africa. It's a point of great reflection that we need to do as a country, and I believe as a continent wholeheartedly. So we're going to be getting into the second part of our afternoon. And as we do that, we are going to be opening the conversation up. I think a great deal has been said. I personally feel like I've had 2 or 3 keynote speeches already. You know, when you come to the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture, you've got to bring your dictionary as well. Professor LenkaBula said UNISA's open for business. Certainly, yeah, you feel that as the proceedings are going on. But I think it's a great reflection point for all of us as a country and as a society. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be getting into the second phase of our program. And in that phase, we're going to be opening up the conversation. And to do that, we're going to be inviting onto stage the patron of the foundation, but also inviting the Vice President of King's College London, who are going to lead us in a conversation. At this stage, I'm going to have to see if we can convince them to take some engagement from the room. Would you want me to do that? Would you want to have it more of an open conversation? How many people are ready to say very smart things? No, I'm being serious. We're talking about the President Thabo Mbeki. So if I'm going to use my liberties as program director this afternoon, I have to know that what you're going to say is going to rise to the level that is expected. Now that the disclaimer has been put out there, shall I convince our patron and our organizers to open up? questions, not comments, questions during that Q&A session? Okay, wonderful. I see some hands are up. No, this is not the time. You must wait for us to get there. You must wait for me to say, anybody with questions, raise your hand. Unfortunately, there is no queuing order for that. So I can't take your names and put you down on the queue. Ladies and gentlemen, we're waiting for the patron to make his way back into the room. In case you're wondering, why is she still on stage? Can you please introduce us to the next thing? There we go. Without further ado, please help me welcome onto stage. Wait for it, wait. Please help me welcome onto stage Professor Funmi Olonisakin, the Vice President of King's College. Yes, yes, please come up. Yes, please come up. And you can take your seat down there, please, ma'am. Thank you. And she'll be joined in conversation with His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. President, if you can please come onto the stage.
Well, we'll see.
Mr. President, whilst... Oh, please be seated. Whilst you took a short break, I think the audience had been polled, and there's some indication that a couple of people want to get engaged after the kind of keynote address we just received. So the audience wants to participate. It was meant to be you and I in dialogue, so I'm sure you'll be pleased that we'll be in dialogue with the room, which is not bad. Yeah. I think we've been provoked quite a bit this evening, have we not been? Yeah. We've heard some really amazing, and I have listened to Professor Fayemi quite a few times. He didn't tell you, as a former student of King's College London, PhD War Studies, one of the best, sharpest security analysts in the world, not just in Africa. You've just heard him. And he's been in politics, he's been in policy. Now he's thrown down the gauntlet and told us quite a few things that we need to do. And Mr. President, if you permit me, what I would like to do is maybe just give some top lines from what we've just heard, ask you to reflect on one thing, and then ask the audience to reflect for us. Don't ask too many questions. Participate, respond to what you've just heard, okay? If you were with me at King's, I would tell you you should ask no questions. You should offer a statement of fact. You should respond to what has been said and offer us some good thinking as a way forward. But I was taking copious notes following my friend and brother. Let me highlight a few things. The beauty of the Africa Day lecture is that you don't leave the same way you came. You never do live the same way you came. We have been challenged robustly to think about rebuilding African unity in an age of fragmentation, and the questions of sovereignty, solidarity, and renewal of institutions and the relationship between them is what we've just heard. But Mr. President, I agree, and I think the concept, the way you've thought it through, tells us that without that collective agency, which is our unity on the continent, without even, and I would want to put on the table as well that the sovereignty of individual African states is not what this is about. It's about the collective sovereignty of Africa. And that's why when Professor Fayemi says, we can't, and I'm going to quote I was making that note. Trust is the currency of legitimacy, and you talked about, the belief that the dignity of all Africans is tied, of one African is tied to the dignity of all Africans. That is rooted in the notion of collective agency, collective purpose, collective sovereignty. And so I don't think that we were without unity previously. We know what good looks like. We have known what good looks like on this continent, even if we have not experienced excellence. Mr. President, you were part of what good looked like. You saw a measure of unity on the continent of Africa in responding to several conflicts, in making decisions collectively with other statesmen in Africa. You yourself hosted, you chaired the African Union. You in Durban, I think it was in 2001 or 2002, welcomed the AU as AU chairperson. What did good look like at the time? What were the ingredients of good? I'd like you to please reflect on that. And then after Mr. President has spoken, I'd like to point to 2 or 3 people. Please, I saw a hand here. Quickly. The guy with the red, striped red, green. Oh, that's not the South African color, it is? It is, yes. I will remember you. You'll be number 1. But Mr. President, can you please reflect on that unity and what good looked like? Because if we're going to rebuild the unity, we need to know what to look forward to. I think Professor Fayemi has told us a little bit tonight.
Well, thanks, Funmi. I think, first of all, I'd like to say thanks to Professor Fayemi for talking to us as frankly as he did. I think it's very important that we don't, we tell ourselves the truth about ourselves. It's very, very important. Funmi, I was saying the other day, through NEPAD, we decided that one of the major challenges on the continent is eradication of poverty. These things that Professor Fayemi is talking about, institutions, this and that, and the other, governance and so on. In the end, it's changing the lives of our people radically. We got to eradicate poverty on the continent. It's a very major challenge. So, African unity, African renaissance, in the end, this is a product you must get. So we then say, you need capital. You need capital to join with labor and all of that, but capital, where is it going to come from? This self-reliance. So we decide an obvious source of capital for us from within the continent are the pension funds. They got billions and billions and so on. So let's get money from the pension funds to invest in African development in order to defeat poverty. So the process started. And out of the 54, whatever the number of countries were at the time, there were only 2 that contributed. 2. It was South Africa and Ghana. The rest, no. One of them, the fund managers, it actually had some billions of dollars in that pension fund. They said the level of risk on the continent is too high. And therefore, we can't invest these African pension funds in Africa. We'll invest them in the London Stock Exchange. Literally, literally. And that's what they did. That pension fund, I know that fund, which was infrastructure fund, which was called an infrastructure fund, it still exists. But I'm telling you about the African response to a real African challenge. I'm sure that 90% of us here know this Chinese name, Deng Xiaoping. And the reason we know Deng Xiaoping is because Deng Xiaoping said, let's have an open whatever. What he was addressing, he was saying correctly, that China does not have the capacity to generate the capital to develop itself. When he said open door, he meant let's attract capital from the rest of the world. That's why China is where it is today. Because he understood that the China as it is with all the size of the population and so on, it did not have the capacity to generate the volumes of capital it would need in order to achieve its objectives. So you had to access this capital from elsewhere, central to the open door policy of China. That's why you find today huge volumes of private capital in the Chinese economy. It was a very correct, very deliberate, very correct decision. Now, and he got the response. Part of the reason they got the response is because of the size of the market in China. There's no sensible business person in the world who did not want to be in the Chinese market with 1 billion people. The way somebody said quite correctly that we are very close to China and India in terms of size of population now. But does the continent have that capacity? We don't have enough capital. I'm saying 2 countries only offered capital into this from the pension funds. The continent does not have enough capital to wipe out poverty. We have to go to the rest of the world where the capital is. But do we have the capacity that China had to attract that capital? I don't think we have. These things that Professor Fayemi was talking about. Where's the cohesion of the continent? Where's the sense of a common direction? This thing, when you were saying that, you see, you can't separate solidarity and sovereignty. These things are related. But in many instances, we're sovereign, 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 my country, my country, my country. How do you want to subtract me? You take me away from the rest of the Africans. I can't. You are going to fail. I'm going to refuse. Because I'm very much part of these Africans. Without these Africans, I'm going to fail. So that definition of the relationship between the solidarity and the sovereignty is very, very important. But do we have the political capacity in the continent to develop it so that when we say open door policy in Africa because we want to eradicate poverty, capital will come. It will only come if we define ourselves in a particular way. So long as we define ourselves as these different fragments, each one thinking that can survive on its own, then we're landed with this problem of poverty forever. So I hope that you are going to ask them to answer the question. Really, what practically, what do we do? The problem of poverty in South Africa is very deep and very entrenched, massive. And it's typical of the whole of the continent. We're faced with the same challenge. I'm saying you should ask them how to solve the problem. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. President. And I see a second hand in the room. I'm looking as far. So number 1 here, number 2 here, white sleeve, I see you, woman, yes? I want a woman from that side, and I've seen her. I'll come back. Thank you. You've heard what the president said. Think carefully. Reflect. Please reflect on what you heard. But let me try to simplify the question for you. You've already heard a lot from Mr. President. What do you see as the strongest unifier in Africa? We're talking about the unity of the country. What is the one thing that unifies us? So we know the one thing that we have in common. Poverty is not the preserve of one single state or one single group of people, right? Across the continent of Africa, we have not managed to eradicate, poverty. What is it that unifies us? What is the one factor you think can unify us, apart from that we have in common? Or, let me also give you an option. Second person, think about what fragments us the most. What did you hear? Yeah.
Thank you so very much. My name is Oliver Chikosoro. I'm representing Global Offsetters. Thank you, Your Excellency. I meant to comment partly on what you have alluded to. The first one is that as a continent, in order for us to be able to have economic growth, we have to unite. And I know you are passionate about that. But we also have to capacitate our people in order for us to grow our economy. My question to you will be, are we progressing? Before I answer you, are we progressing as a continent? The last one is that Prof touched on industrialization, value addition to industrialization, and you touched on where are we going to get the capital to be able to allow industrialization and to grow our economy and create jobs for our people. But the question is, are we progressing as a continent? Thank you.
So can I ask you, though, industrialization and also that kind of progress in terms of really getting that capital that the continent needs. What do you think, what is our narrative? What is it that can shift us to that level? We can ask whether we're progressing. From where you stand, what can take us forward?
I would say capacitating by bringing everyone to the room. We need to talk. We're not talking enough as a continent. So I would say that we need to come together and talk.
Is the African Union helping?
Not really. I think we need to have a serious conversation. I think we have a blame game. So I think what we need to do is to bring the African Union, bring the private sector, bring the capital, bring the investment in one room, bring the academia to start executing. I know we also tend to talk a lot, but we need to start executing as a collective, not as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. Do you have the mic? Can you please pass the mic down?
Hello. Oh. Good evening, everybody. My name is
No. Number 2 is here.
Oh, sorry.
Number 2 is here. Please.
I'm
going to follow the order that we had. Number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. To answer the question as to what do we need to do, I think it starts with education.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, sorry. My name is Thabo Mbeki. I'm from civil society. I think, His Excellency, where we should start is from the education. Our education system right now is not speaking to our problems. It is fragmented. And therefore, growing up, actually up until recently, I never understood what struggles the other African brothers are facing. So our education needs to be unpacked, and it needs to be intentional in solving African problems. And we involve youth. I'm glad UNISA is in the building. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Number 3 over there, so capacitating, right? Education, you can see how we're connecting the dots. Number 3, yes, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Chikomo Dao. I am a senior global account manager for a global company. And I wanted to primarily focus on the statement that he mentioned that we lack capacity to drive Africa to what it is or want to be in future. But I don't want to say I oppose to the topic or the statement, but I do feel like it primarily should be focused that we'd lack the confidence as Africans to achieve certain things that need to be dismantled or embarked in the continent. And what I mean by that is that already as the black majority in Africa, or rather say people of color in Africa, we already see, based on the white monopoly or the discreditation of black success, is already being imposed towards our people. The issue lies primarily that black people don't even entrust one another with provided projects. Also, the lack of confidence that the black elders have within younger leaders to be provided spaces to achieve certain things. That is the problem, because we're already backward thinking, having to assume that we need to focus on things that are presented in or traditional aspects, and sort of following things that could be introduced in the moment. And that's what I feel like is lacking within the African continent. We don't try and we oppose ourselves to rather follow things that can be really newly introduced, such as the youth, or having to have the confidence as the black majority, because as young people, we have confidence amongst one another, the confidence of speaking on issues, like the professor mentioned, having the topic of the NSARS. The youth was able to do such things for their country. So if we were able to garner on boosting the confidence of our younger generation to be a part of these spaces, to be a part of these topics, that could be a segment to it, similar to what he had mentioned about the educational sector, that it lacks in that department. And having to bring in so many innovative things that could be able to improve the educational sector and the youth in its entirety. That's also another issue at hand.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So can I summarize? So I need people, when you are asking your question, or at least making your statement, make it short, sharp, so that we can hear you. But the last statement, I mean, the last person that spoke, the sister that spoke, is really talking about within society, even among young people, being able to trust ourselves, the divisions, even when we're trying to pursue a common good. And on the continent of Africa, if this were the African Leadership Center, I think we settled the debate on the question of blackness or not, or global blackness, by the question of who's an African. And I think we settled that question of who's an African. When you're working for the interests of the continent, those divisions cannot be the starting point. Understanding the sense of purpose and the common purpose, very important. Thank you for that point. I'd like you to summarize those points for me in 2 sentences, so I take them out of this room. Mr. President, do you want to say anything to what you've heard so far? I'm coming back, and I'm starting on that side this time. I'll take another 3. Have you heard something you want to come back on?
No, the comments that have made, the comments that have been made are correct. But I want to come back to what I was saying. And I'm going to repeat myself. We've got too many people who are poor. Millions. And there's no perspective as to how you're going to get them out of this poverty. And what it requires, you've got to build roads. You've got to build factories. You've got to develop farms. You've got to train people, capacitate them at universities, at technical colleges, and so on. All of it requires capital. We can dream about all of these things if you don't answer this question. Where do you get the money to build the road? Let's try and answer it. I'm trying to follow what Professor Fayemi was doing. I was saying he was being very specific. What are the actual concrete challenges we're facing, and what should we do about them? I'm posing this one for that reason. You know, we don't have time to go into the history of this thing. If you look at the EU has got what they call regional policy. At some point, the EU decides that they want to constitute themselves into one economic community. And then they say, for that economic community to work, it means it must be, people must operate more or less on an, what you call it, even basis, equal basis or something. The consequence of that was that they then took a decision, a very correct decision. You can't ask a poor Portugal to compete against Germany. You say that in the same market, you can't. It's wrong, it's unfair, it can't happen. So what are we going to do? We're going to transfer resources from the rich country, Germany, to the poor country, Portugal. That's how the EU has developed. Because you couldn't have that common market without those capital transfers from the rich to the poor. I'm saying, how does the continent access this capital? Repeat what the Europeans have done. There was a meeting of the World Economic Forum in Abuja, I don't know, 7-8 years ago. And the Premier of China came and addressed that meeting. I was at the meeting. And the Premier of China says, as we understand it, the African continent has taken a decision for integration. Important, that's a very important decision, which is going to require roads, it's going to require seaports, airports, all of that. And he said, at this moment, China has got overcapacity in all of these fields. We're offering the African continent, we're ready to come and work with you. Let's build the roads and the rails and this and that to integrate the continent. Nothing moved, nothing happened. There was not a single inch of taken by the African Union. The Chinese were offering, they were saying, you're saying integrate the continent. We've got the capacity. We're ready to work with you. Nothing happened. That's why I'm saying, here is a very, very practical question. The capacity is very much part of that development, obviously. And that common purpose and the self-identification, what is it that unites us as Africans and says this is what we want to do together, obviously. But there's very, very many practical African questions which we're refusing to answer. We live at a general plane. We like making general statements. Why don't we get to the specifics? How do we get to this damn thing? That's what I'm saying. Can they please answer this question? Thanks.
Mr. President, I'm so sorry. I really, really am sorry. We're going to need to bring this to a close soon, very, very soon. So I'll only take one question from that side and another from this side, and I'll probably look towards the back. And I'm sorry, I'm not very popular right now, but the broadcasters have to finish. And I really am sorry about that. From that side, well, since you stood up.
Yes, I already have the mic.
Since you stood up.
Yes.
The man in the black suit.
I already have the mic.
Excuse me?
I already have the mic. I've been given a mic.
I'm sure he will allow you.
Yes.
But please, snap it, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, please. Please.
My name is Peli Sankomo. I'm a development economist. I currently do advisory work on the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Several things that the president is raising. I think the first issue is the quality of leadership. Quality of leadership which will allow us to make it sure that we build stable communities. The second component is vision. The third one is moving away from a nationalistic interest, which we've seen a lot in our regions and in the continent, and thinking about looking at actually cross-border value chain creation, but also breaking down the homogeneous nature of our economies.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yes. At the back.
Sorry, I'm on the side. I'm here. Hello.
Please give it to that man at the back. Who is the person who says I'm here? Where is, yes, okay. Who said I'm here? Okay, take it with you, take it. 1 minute, I'm sorry, 30 seconds. 30 seconds, go on, please.
Hi, my name is High Commissioner Michelle Arendse. I'm representing the Koi and the Sun today here. Thank you for the opportunities, Excellency President Thabo Mbeki. It's been a long time for the Koi and the Sun to have this opportunity to let you hear us. Coming back to what you asked, our input today is stop trading our minerals and resources that can build our own economies and self-sustainability. My question is, can our dignity ever be restored from a perspective of repatriation of life and livelihood, whereas faced for the decades, the generations have lost economical and social injustice and disadvantages? Can that dignity ever be restored in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think the question is, and thank you for that statement over there. That was well taken. In your question itself is embedded answers. I have to bring it to a close, and I'm sorry. I keep seeing your face. I have to say I'm sorry. I'm bringing this to a close. Mr. President, I hope you heard some answers or makings of answers.
Just one last thing to the South Africans. Look at the state corporations. If we talk development here, you've got to look at the role of the state in terms of this, as Professor Fayemi was saying. And look at what's happened to the state corporations over the last few years. The destruction of the state corporations. And it's continuing now as we're sitting here. These are very practical questions that have got to do with helping to solve our problems. And I'm saying all of us throughout our continent need to come at this development. The point that was made there, the quality of leadership. What are we looking at? What are we? I don't know how many people have looked at the 2063 reports. Agenda 2063, they've done the first decade and done a report, the AU. This is what we've achieved in the first 10 years of Agenda 2063. Have we looked at it? Do we believe it, that report? Yeah. And these are very, very practical things. They've got to do with the lives of our people. And I'm really hoping that out of this, having listened to Professor Fayemi, when we go home, we go away thinking this, that he has given us a task to answer practically to all of the challenges that he posed. If we do that, I think we have achieved a great deal. Thanks a lot.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Please, let's give them a warm round of applause. Let me say, I had a great deal of confidence when you said we must open the session. We are still left with what is the national, should I even say, continental question that has not been answered as we close off the session. So, Professor LenkaBula will take any discounts you're offering. We're willing to lay by if it's possible. But it's about what are the practical answers that we have to the very simple yet perhaps quite complex questions we have to deal with as a continent. and even as a society. On that note, I'm going to ask, please, can all of our guests from today join me on stage as we take some pictures, just a quick picture moment. And then after that, we will be joined by the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation to give us his closing remarks. So if we can all please come to the stage. Dr. Fayemi, yes, the chairperson, President Mbeki, yes, please.
It could be.
Africa. This is our Africa. The Africa yethulela. Enkosi sizeni mnyama. Enkosi nyana kaKhoveli. Enkosi nyana kaNomaka. We 16 years ago, when our Kalale Foundation, ukuze sibe namhlanje, sithathele Afrika yethu. We-Afrika inenkakisayo. Inenkakisayo kakhulu. Yani namazwe amahlanu nesine. Lithi Afrika hlanganani. Lithi Afrika unite. Thandanani
Thank you. Thank you for that. The person who's going to have the last word today, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be the CEO of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And thank you for allowing us to turn this into a town hall. I hope you're not going to want to have a chat with me later about taking liberties on your platform.
No, it will have to do with the reduction of salaries. I think it's days like this and moments like this when we can say, Professor Fayemi, it feels good to be an African. For us as a foundation, these events are not just events. These are gatherings for a call to action. I've seen professors here from Stellenbosch and others from Walter Sisulu and others from UNISA. I wish they can take this lecture and say practically, how do we use this lecture as a center of teaching? So my friend there from Zambia sent me a note, and he was saying there's a very dangerous way of teaching history in South Africa by all universities. And he says not just it's not relevant, but it's regionalistic. The universities in Limpopo are talking about Limpopo. the universities here are talking about this area, etc., etc. So we don't even have the understanding of the history of South Africa. And let me say this boldly, Professor LenkaBula. We had a discussion in Parliament yesterday. One of the clearest revelations in that discussion is very, very high-level people of South Africa who do not know South Africa. And many of them are teachers of our children. So what Professor Fayemi has done here, it's this action that we must reverse that. Spend time to understand this country and its location in the rest of the continent. But Katie, thank you very much for doing what you're doing. I was very worried because amongst these journalists that we must honor, who takes interest in our continent, there are very few of them. We had amongst us Miranda Straydom. We have lost her. She took a very, very serious interest in what is going on in our continent. I got very worried when I learned from SABC that Sophie Boqwana is retiring. And I said, there we are losing somebody that can reflect this continent in its authenticity to us. And I suspect you must take that responsibility and make sure that the younger journalists will not rely on New York Times, on Financial Times to learn something about our continent. But I must thank the people of Cape Town. I wasn't sure about this idea, Lupi, of being in Cape Town. I don't trust people here. So I'm really very happy with this disappointment, and we did this thing because we honored our chair because she's from Cape Town. But I really want to thank people of Cape Town. So when this thing happened, another activist of the ANC here, Sabelo, said, are we supposed to pay? I said, no, Sabelo, bring as many other activists as possible. You don't have to pay. So I can actually say that the people of Cape Town are interested in this conversation. It's important, colleagues, so that we dismiss this notion of the possibility of cessation of this province from the rest of the continent. We come here like my sister from the Khoi community and say, this is the beginning of who we are as Africans in this place. So this place belongs to the rest of the continent. But I must say thanks to the colleagues and the CEO of Outer NEPAD for kickstarting these conversations on the Africa Day this week. And there we ended up, as I'm saying, this is not events, these are calls to action. We pick up two other things, Chairperson Geraldine, that the business people here in South Africa in particular know very little about what is happening beyond Limpopo. And Moiseni was asking them specifically, how many of you have read the report on the illicit financial flows to understand the crisis that our continent is facing? It's very unclear, Nomlala, if you guys have ever read that report. But I think we made a commitment with Alan Mugoki that we will engage with business, essentially to say we need to talk about our continent so that we don't suffer this fate that President is talking about and have business that is very suspicious of its own continent, that it will be prepared to say, let's rather invest in London rather than here. So that NEPAD conversation was critical in that sense. Yesterday, we were hosted by Parliament, and I need to say thank you very much to the Speaker, who's facing a number of challenges of setting committees of certain things, but she had time to sit with us and do this very, very important reflection on the 30 years of our Constitution. And I really want to dispel some of the notions that happened during the discussions there. That, General Olomis, that Constitution is very, very important in creating the structures of constitutional democracy. The structures that we have had never been there before. That Constitution is very, very important in enshrining the values of democracy in this nation. Those values had never been there when you were still a dictator in the Transkei. This Constitution had never had entrenched Bill of Rights that guarantees freedoms and liberties. It has displaced the apartheid colonial hegemonic structures. And I suspect those apartheid hegemonic structures, unless we become foolish, are permanently destroyed. It has destroyed the idea that being black and poor is a crime. And even worse, if you are black, poor, and you complain, is a treason. So anybody, Professor LenkaBula, that says this Constitution is un-African or un-Azanian, he's not talking about this Constitution, he's talking about something else. Anybody that says this Constitution needs to be shredded, that person belongs somewhere else, not in this journey of civilizing our country and our continent. But there is no doubt that some of the difficulties, economic difficulties that we have faced, might have caused cynicism. But that cynicism must never allow us to disown what our ancestors have bestowed on us, which is the achievement of this glorious document that becomes the inheritance of our long struggles. So thank you, Professor Fayemi, for this intellectual feast that you have provided to us. It's in front of us, and I think we must take it and use it, not to say you spoke well, but about the challenges you pose on us. What do we do with those challenges? You know, President, I delivered the invite to Professor Fayemi in Nigeria. I sent that invite. I had not opened I said, this is what President Mbeki says, what is he saying? He said, you must come and deliver the lecture in South Africa. And he said, I'm coming. I said, but you haven't read the letter. So he said, without reading the letter, that's a command. That's our responsibility to this continent. And what Professor Fayemi had done, you hear that he was once a minister of minerals in that place, Nigeria. He was a governor of the state. But what he has done with his pension, I suspect, he has built a resort And that resort supports an institute which is called Amandla Institute. It's Amandla Institute outside Lagos. The reason building that Amandla Institute, Professor Fayemi is collecting the thinkers and the actors in Africa whose preoccupation is to think about our continent and to find solutions. So the things he was talking about here are not just intellectual stuff. It's the practical work that he has undertaken. I've been recruited into that institute. And President Mbeki, we are planning to launch a council which is going to work alongside the AU to be critical partners of AU, neither to be the lapdogs or the watchdogs of the AU, but to say, beyond those leaders you see in the AU, there are other interested Africans who are interested in the development of the continent. Those are the people that Professor Fayemi is galvanizing in his retirement. So thank you for that. And I'm glad that you raised these things, that the challenges that we are facing, that my sister then Nkomo was raising, that the issue of leadership crisis, the hopelessness and the intolerant levels of poverty, the crisis of law and order, the crisis of skewed economy that is not working for the rest of us, that can't be blamed on undocumented immigrants. Our problems are much bigger, and we must confront them properly. But I come back, Professor van Niekerk, and say the wretched are on the street. They are marching. And as they are marching on the street, they are alone. The elite, whether you're talking about the intellectuals, whether you're talking about economic elite, Budayanda, or you're talking about the political elite, they are nowhere to be found. And I think the challenge in this room is that how do we respond to this wretched that are moving up and down the streets and provide a proper rational direction as to how do we solve the problems that we face as a country. Because if we don't, Chairperson Geraldine, we will lose even the moral ability to say we are in solidarity with Cuba. How can you be in solidarity with Cuba when you're not in solidarity with the Zimbabweans? We are in solidarity with Palestine. How do we become in solidarity with Palestine when we can't be in solidarity with the people of Lesotho? We're in solidarity with Sudan. How do we do that? Because it's very, very important that as a country, we continue to occupy this moral high ground. Thanks, Professor Funmi, for doing what you are doing. I've committed yourself. Professor Funmi is in London, and she's doing what many people do. You know, there are certain people here in the country, if you employ one person, he brings many other people like him or her. So Professor Funmi is in that important university. She is bringing lots of other people like her in that university. I was one of the people that were brought. That's why Fayemi and all of them are there. So I've committed these other universities that are here, Professor Funmi, that we need to bring more people, even from the Transkei to King's College. So that's what we're talking about. But I'm very glad that my dear sister Malina Haddadi, the deputy chair of the AU Commission, has sent the message that she sent, because the work we are doing here is the work of the AU. And I think it's important that the AU endorses this. Just as I conclude, I need to say, President Mbeki, we used to talk lots about economy as you hear him. One of the concepts he was talking about was the concept of patriotic bourgeoisie. I I've been looking for those people, Mr. President. I can't find them. So, but what happened 2 weeks ago, we found 3. So we found Clinics Health Group led by the 2 doctors that are here, Dr. Kamana Matseke and Dr. Ayanda Nsaluba. And they say, we are those patriotic bourgeoisie, we will invest in great ideas. So they are the ones that supported this thing. So then there's another chap who is a shareholder in this place. They call themselves NCS Investments, and it's represented here by Andile Nomlala. He's former president of BMF. I don't know how he left BMF, but he says, I'm very, very much interested in investing in these good ideas. And there's another chap, Mr. President, from Oudtshoorn, out of all places. A place of the ostriches, but his name is Hope Kicha. He runs, they run a company called Sianda Resources. So when we were sitting at Vergelegen and they were telling us, we have made this, we have made this, we have made this, there's a group that was made by Anglo-American. There's a group of black mining companies. Anglo-American has got grandchildren. So this one, Sianda Resources, is one of the grandchildren of Anglo-American. So they also said, because we have been inspired by these ideas, we will invest in these things. So I just want to let anybody know that it's not because the foundation has got any money. It was the combination of these people plus UNISA that made all of this possible. But in the end, the organization and production of this thing and the galvanization of the UNISA team and the TMF team has been done very ably by a boy from Woma Township in Port Elizabeth, Luphumlo Ngaisa. Lupi has been amazing. He has not slept for the past 2 weeks. And he did himself a mistake. 9 years ago, he asked me for a favor. And I did that favor for him. So he's been paying these favors. He had difficulties in Tanzania last year, in Guinea-Conakry, but I said, Lupi, we must deliver this event as if we are a rich foundation. And we continue to do that. So Lupi has been really, really very amazing in terms of doing the work that we are doing. I must say, though, also thanks to the sign language interpreters who made it possible that this thing we're talking about do not end up amongst only you that are able-bodied and make sure that all our society can understand what we are doing. So as we conclude this program, it's correct to say we will be with about 5 schools in Milnerton on Monday, because we think it's critical that we start engaging the learners about this continent. And we will try and deal with the student and youth at the UNISA campus in Paro in the afternoon, because I think that investment on young people is critical. But I must say thank you very much to each and every one of you present in the room and those that are watching at home. And I think all of us must declare that Africa is more than a place on a map. It is the heartbeat within us, the spirit that guides us, and the place we can call home. and a home where no African can be called a foreigner. A happy Africa Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have officially come to the end of our proceedings for today. And I must say that the kind of conversation that we've had here is indicative of the fact that talking for the sake of talking is no longer enough. It no longer suffices. But what we do need is the courage to have the honest conversations and to tackle all the elephants in the room. We can agree that there are multiple elephants in the room. On that note, I also want to say, begrudgingly so, but I took myself there, it looks like Paris has ended the drought. I am so pleased with this reaction. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be ending our proceedings here officially. I'm going to ask that our guests, all of the guests with the white tags, all of our guests with the white tags, once you exit the plenary hall, if you can please make your way to Hall D. There will be ushers outside who will be directing you. If you've got a white tag, please make your way to Hall D. And all of our other guests, there will be a light dinner that will be served outside. Thank you all for coming out Cape Town for the first time for the Thabo Mbeki Africa Day lecture.